and welcome to another edition of The Reaction, our second as a podcast. I'm Sarah Vine, and I'm sitting here with a wonderful Andrew Pearce. Andrew, how's your week been?
Very good week, actually. I've had a very nice week, and I'm very pleased because the book's selling very well.
You haven't got a book out, have you?
Well, how unsubtle of me to mention it so early in the podcast. It's called Finding Margaret. As you know, it's about the search for my birth mother. We had a rather splendid launch at the Carlton Club.
Yes,
I'm not
which
a member.
I attended.
You were there.
And Dame Joan Collins gave a speech.
She did.
There were many glittering people. You gave a very funny speech saying it was the only time that you'd ever been found to be chasing a woman.
Yes, only documentary evidence, as in my birth mother. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, was there, and he called order because you need it with that lot.
Yes,
and there
Biggins was there.
Biggins, some cabinet ministers. Yes. David Starkey, who I'm very fond of. Haven't seen him for a long time. And my big sister was there too.
I know, I met her. She was lovely, and her lovely long-suffering husband Ian, who looked like he looked like he'd landed in hell, basically.
Yes,
but he was very nice.
Not his sort of thing. I couldn't wait to leave. But so all very jolly. And I had a phone call just before we came on air from Jeffrey Archer. As you know, Jeffrey Archer was at the book launch too, who was very excited for me because he can analyse book figures, and I'm doing quite well in the Amazon list, but there's another list which he said is definitive. And he said, you're number 29 in the bestsellers. He said, but that bestseller list includes books about air fryers. To which I say, what's an air fryer, Jeffrey? He said, I don't really know. But he said, let me tell you, if there's a book about an air fryer, straight to number one.
Well, Andrew, I can't believe you don't know what an air fryer is.
I've heard of them because
ridiculous.
I bought my sister, who we talked about,
biggest thing of the moment.
an air fryer.
Yeah, I wrote, I'm afraid I'm partially responsible for air fryers because I wrote a big piece about 2 years ago in the Mail saying how brilliant they were and how they're fantastic. I mean, they're mini ovens. They're basically little ovens, and they cook everything faster and at about half the cost of a normal oven.
Right.
And they're very good if you happen to own a teenager.
I don't.
Who likes to eat things covered in breadcrumbs.
I don't like breadcrumbs either.
But they will also roast a chicken. But anyway, we're not here to talk about air fryers, fascinating as that is. We're here to talk about the election.
Well, today we should be talking, if Keir Starmer had his way, Labour's agenda today was the NHS. But they've completely unravelled because it's the first big gaffe by Starmer. And who would have thought Diane Abbott, of all people,
I know,
an historic figure in the sense she's Britain's first black woman MP, has been turned by Starmer into an unlikely martyr.
I know, it's very interesting. I have to say, I quite like Diane Abbott. I mean, I know she's not, politically, she's completely sort of at the other end of the spectrum.
Well, we don't agree with anything she says or does.
But I do respect her, and I do think she's the closest. I mean, she's been there for 30 years.
37.
37 years, okay. And I think that she's often, I do think she's often the victim of sort of prejudice.
She's subjected to more online abuse than any other of the 650 MPs.
And I think she has, like all people who've been in politics for a very long time, she has a few issues which are probably to do with being
drinking alcohol out of a can at 10 in the morning on a tube wasn't a great look. Walking out in those odd shoes.
But I always remember when she got into trouble for sending her son to private school back in 2003. I always felt a bit sorry for her because she said in an interview, you know, I've had to choose between being a parent and a politician, and on this occasion I've chosen to be a parent. Yeah. And I thought that was a good thing to say.
The problem was, as a politician, she voted against private schools. Yeah. But the reason she has become this martyr, she wrote a letter to the Observer about a year ago at the height of the row about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, effectively downplaying anti-Semitism, saying it's not much difference to being, if you've got ginger hair, you have the same level of abuse. Nothing like being a black person. She was suspended. She apologised immediately, and that was a year ago. Labour Party conducts an inquiry, and every time we've asked Starmer about it, nothing to do with me, Gov. It's an independent process. We discover this week that actually Labour's National Executive Committee completed its investigation in December, and Diane Abbott did a 2-hour online anti-Semitism course. So done and dusted. So at best he's dissembling, Sarah, or you could say downright lying, because this week they restored the whip to her. Effectively they removed her from the parliamentary party, gave the whip back, but said, you're not standing as a Labour MP.
So I mean,
outrageous. And it's not for him to do that.
It's really
There's
not.
a process,
and
I
think he looks like he's sort of bullying her a bit.
I think he does. A 70-year-old woman who's got issues.
Yeah, who's got issues, and who's sort of apologised and tried to make things right. And you know, I think people should be allowed to apologise. I don't know. It looks very odd. I think he's
Well,
I can see why she also liked a tweet, didn't she, by Jeremy Corbyn saying he was going to run as an independent.
But they've been friends for 50 years.
Exactly. They were lovers.
They used to eat cold baked beans out of a tin in a squat in North London.
That's the myth, yes.
No, it's not the myth. I wrote it in the Daily Mail, so it must be true.
It must be true.
And she did once describe an extraordinary a lover, and they had sex in a haystack, and we pretty much worked out it was Jeremy Corbyn. I know, it's probably too much to conjure. And they did go on holiday on a motorbike. Where do you think he took her? Did he take her to somewhere romantic like the south of France?
Route 69.
Poland,
brilliant.
In the 1980s, during the Cold War.
A brilliant tour of Cold War sites. I know.
Can you imagine?
Well, I mean,
they probably took the Berlin Wall in en route.
Loved it.
Because they would have approved of the Berlin Wall. So she's been effectively barred from standing. Yeah. She wanted to stand again. Yeah. You've even had people, Sarah, like John McTernan, who was Tony Blair's political secretary, a key supporter of Keir Starmer, saying she has been victimised, she's being bullied, and it's unacceptable.
Yeah. I think presumably she just has to go to the Lords now.
Well, if I was Rishi Sunak, I would think, I would make, in his resignation honours list, if we assume he's going to lose the election, and let's be honest, he probably will, he could say, first a Prime Minister of colour, going to put the first black woman MP into the House of Lords. How difficult would that be for Keir Starmer?
Well, exactly. But it's not, I mean, I was quite interested last night because there was a new poll saying that the Tories are only 12 points behind.
Yes, but there were 2 other polls saying they're still 20 points behind. We need a poll of polls of the week. But they've had, but I think look, we laughed about the launch last week, Singing in the Rain, and No Brolly, Rishi off his brolly or off his trolley, whatever the headlines were. But
things can only get wetter.
Only get wetter. That was a good headline. But actually, I think that he's had a good run. National service. I think everyone's talking about it.
It's really interesting, the national service thing, because I've always thought it was quite a good idea generally. I have a slightly different take on it, which is that I think I think it should be for school leavers,
right?
So that if you're not going to go to further education, you can go and do it. And if you go to further education, you're exempt or you can delay it. But I think it's a nice idea. You know, I know lots, particularly after COVID, so many sort of people at that age, 16, 17, 18, have sort of lost their way a little bit.
They have.
And I think it might help them to sort of, I don't know, just get a bit of a framework back into their life. And I think particularly when it comes to sort of countering things like knife crime and gang violence and all of that kind of stuff, I think it could help. And nothing's ever perfect.
We call them NEETs, don't we? No education, no employment, no training.
Exactly.
There are hundreds of thousands of these kids who are NEETs. They could benefit from going into the army for a year.
And some of them might stay in the army. Yeah. Some of them might find a career there, or they might learn skills that they can use elsewhere.
And the army desperately needs recruits. And they do it in Norway. They do it in lots of European countries.
In lots of European countries. I mean, I grew up in Italy, and they used to do. I don't know if they still do, but they were certainly when my brother was that age. They had national service, and basically it sort of involves learning to. Quite a lot of them, like, they teach you to drive. If you don't know how to drive, they'll teach you to drive. They'll teach you how to sort of
probably how to fix the engine of the lorry or the car.
So you learn a lot of kind of quite useful basic life skills that I think a lot of people don't learn in this day and age because they just don't. And things like cooking, you can go and do catering, you can do all sorts of stuff, and it sort of gives you a chance to have a pause, take a deep breath, learn some skills, think about what you want to do. And I just think it is quite a good idea.
I think it's very clever. And then we've also had the idea this week about these silly university courses. Why can you learn hand embroidery for 3 years at university? Why can you learn surf science at university? Just go down to Cornwall and talk to Andrew Ridgeley, who was George Michael's singer, because he's teaching surfing. That's what he does now.
I agree. I don't always think a university degree has to be vocational. I think sometimes learning for learning's sake is a good thing. I don't think, people should be able to study, classics or whatever. But I think that I think there should be more availability of degrees that are vocational that do get you a job, for the simple reason that if you're paying for this stuff, because you and I grew up in an age when you didn't have to pay to go into university.
And 1 in 4 of students never repay the loan.
And that's another thing. Keir Starmer has said that he's not going to, because initially he said, didn't he? He said he was going to abolish the student loans.
That won't happen. If you're a young person listening, they are going to whack you. Yeah. They'll continue to whack you with university tuition fees.
And they're going to put the price up.
Of course they will.
So that he's flip-flopped on that because he was very determined that he was going to abolish that.
But what Rishi's saying too, isn't he, that the money you save from not paying out on these student loans, which are never repaid, he'd plough into apprenticeships, an extra 100,000 apprenticeships. They should do. There were 500,000 apprenticeships here in 2015, down to 340,000 now. Get them back up. When I was 17, 16, it was a noble thing to go into an apprenticeship. My brother did an apprenticeship at British Rail back in 77. He's never stopped working.
Yeah.
Never stop working. You can become an electrician, a plumber, really noble professions now, and there are never enough of them.
No, and also quite AI proof, because I don't think you can get AI to do your plumbing, can you?
Well, no, and if I cannot fix a washer on a tap. I cannot wire a plug.
No.
When I had a car, my father said, "Why don't you do basic car mechanics?" I said, "Because there's no way I'll understand it. I just don't have that mindset."
No.
But these kids could be doing learning.
And plumbers get paid sort of 170,000 a year in London now.
Charlie Mullins, who set up Pimlico Plumbers, he set up his little plumbing business with a tool bag and a white van. He sold Pimlico Plumbers for hundreds of millions of pounds. Self-made man.
Yeah. So let's talk about the third wheel in this general election. Sir Ed Davey.
The Liberal Democrat leader. What a drip. Can we call him a drip?
Well, we have to, because things can only get wetter. He got extremely wet because he was filmed falling off a paddleboard
in Windermere.
In Windermere, wearing
an ill-fitting wetsuit.
Now, can I just say something about wetsuits? Is they just make humans look like Labradors, but really fat ones. I mean, I've worn a wetsuit and it's not a good look, and I just don't know why you would do that to yourself.
He's clambering on the wetboard, on the what is that, paddleboard?
It's a paddleboard,
and watch him now, because he's desperate for publicity. He is going to hurl himself in the water because watch this. Look, he's rocking it deliberately.
Yes,
and he shows he's got no balance. Look,
I don't know if he is rocking it deliberately.
Yes,
he looks to me like he's got look at that paunch. He's got no core strength.
No core strength.
But the thing is
he did it 4 times just in case the cameras missed the first one, the second one, and the third one.
What I don't understand about this is why this is a way of him flipping his legs. Why does this tell us anything about what kind of a leader he would be?
Well,
I don't understand.
It just shows he's an overgrown child. Because if your 14-year-old behaved like that, you'd say, that's enough now. Grow up.
And also then later on he was filmed sort of riding a bicycle down a hill.
Yes.
Like a child.
And the thing is, he did this. Look, here he goes again. Off we go again. That's the second time.
Oh. Yeah. Anyway, so that's Ed.
That's Ed Davey. So if you didn't think he was a complete drip, there's the proof.
So to all of those Tory voters who are thinking of voting Lib Dem, you're basically voting for a human Labrador.
I know, and it's not a good look.
So the other big story this week, election story, has been Angela Rayner being exonerated of having 2 homes, which is nice.
Were you surprised?
No.
Police decided to take no action.
Yes, well, that's good for her. But then there was a slightly dodgy video of her basically begging for votes.
Begging, it was humiliating.
It was quite strong.
She was clearly in, I would imagine, if it wasn't a mosque, because she was the only woman in there.
Well, there was actually a lady standing behind her, which I think was her security guard.
Member of her staff.
But basically, it was her in a room full of men.
Muslim men.
Kind of just sort of...
She was restating...
promising the world in return for their votes.
She will recognise, Labour government will recognise Palestinian state. So she changed Labour Party policy, which is quite interesting. Yep. But she was grovelling. And the reason she's grovelling, Sarah, is because George Galloway's Workers of Britain Party is putting a candidate up against her. George Galloway won that stunning by-election result in Rochdale in February, which is just 12 miles from Angela Rayner's constituency. There's a big Muslim constituency. She was begging for the vote. And did you see the body language of the men? They weren't listening and they weren't looking at her.
So I think this is all part of this awful sort of secularisation of British politics which we're seeing. And I don't, it's not. good thing at all.
Well, while the Labour Party spokesman, by the way, put a statement out saying HMRC is not investigating any further. HMRC will not discuss that with the Labour Party. They won't discuss it with anybody. We won't. I mean, if I'm being investigated by HMRC, I guess they would tell me. But they do not discuss it in the media. So we do not know if HMRC are looking into our affairs. They probably should be, because she could have handled all of this so differently. When the Mail on Sunday broke that story, she could have just said months ago, oh, maybe I do owe some capital gains tax when she sold her property, because her husband and her had a house property too. Maybe I do. There might be a capital gains tax issue. Oh God, if there is, I'll sort it out. Small beer, small fight, all over. But instead, she went on the offensive, attacking the Mail.
No, and all of her sort of various kind of lackeys are doing the same. I don't know. She's a divisive figure.
We'll see more of her now, though, because they think she's in the clear. Angela Rayner.
How do you think? So I think one of the reasons that Rishi called this election when he called it is because he sort of hoped that he would catch the Labour slightly on the back foot. Do you think that's proven to be the case?
I don't think Labour has been sure-footed. They put out that letter, for instance, with the backing of 121 businesses, and then had to withdraw it because some of the businesses had been wound up years ago. Did you see Kemi Badenoch literally ripped it to pieces? She did. Yeah. And not a single businessman or woman on the letter was part of the FTSE 100 on the stock exchange. No. So not significant players at all. No. And there was a fabulous letter in one of the newspapers today saying there are 5.3 million registered businesses. Why does Labour think it's something to boast about? They've got 121 of them to support them.
Well, there has been a really concerted campaign in certain quarters to big up Rachel Reeves and her kind of abilities, because I think the Labour Party are very worried about their standing economically. Yeah. I don't know why, because it's not like the Tories have done much better. No. But generally, there's a sense that Labour are not very good with money.
They're wheeling her out all the time. Yeah. And if you just hear it on the radio, you think, am I listening to Doctor Who? Is that a Dalek? She is robotic.
Anyway, so I think it's early days yet.
It is.
But we don't really know.
Well, there's one poll which said 12 points.
Yes.
But it's still a long way to go.
It's still a very long way to go. But as I said last week when we did our little reaction special, I think this election is just about mitigating the damage.
Yeah.
To the Tories.
It's about mitigating the scale of the defeat.
It's about ensuring that there's still an opposition.
Which we need. It's good for the country, needs a proper opposition.
Exactly. So I know that the BBC are obviously very famously impartial, but newspapers are not.
No.
And what do we think? How do we think things are going to shake down?
You can already see the Times. Murdoch always wants to. Rupert Murdoch, who owns the Times, always wants to back the winner. His paper's clearly shifted already. Yeah. There was a very significant appointment when they took on as a chief political correspondent Aubrey Allegretti, who came in from the Guardian. I thought that's very significant. And the letter from the 121 businessmen and women on the front page of the Times. The Times didn't point out the elephant in the room. There isn't a serious business person on that letter. One of them, by the way, is the director of Thames Water. Whoops, aren't Thames Water about to go bust? Yeah. And aren't Thames Water the one with the companies chucking all the pollution in the water? Exactly. So it was taken uncritically. So that's a clear sign where the Times is going. The Sunday Times, of course, may well go different because they often do. Yeah. If you think in the referendum, Times backed Remain, and the Sunday Times backed Brexit, or it was the other way around? Can't remember.
I think it was the Times backed Remain and the Sunday Times, yes. Yeah.
And,
I mean, it's just sort of spreading your bets, really, isn't it? Hedging your bets, rather.
The Express is being very loyal to the Tory party. Yeah. And the Mail is giving Labour, I would say, a fair crack of the whip.
A fair crack of the whip, which as it should be.
Yeah, Rachel Reeves's article the other day, pledging she wouldn't put up any taxes, I don't believe that, by the way, was front page on the Daily Mail on Saturday. And she had an article in the paper.
And we were quite critical of the national service idea.
We were.
So we didn't just swallow that.
We think, in principle, it's a good idea, but there wasn't much detail.
No, there wasn't.
And, of course, you and I will write what we like. And, I mean, I'm writing today about Diane Abbott, and I'm saying there it's a huge screw-up by Labour. But equally, we will... Your view on what whether they're doing quite well is your view.
Completely. I think columnists just stick to their view. I mean, I personally think the national service thing is quite a good idea. I wrote a piece today in the paper explaining why I think the VAT thing is on public schools is not a good idea, even though I'm not a big fan of public schools. I didn't send my children to private schools.
Because it's a kick in your aspirations.
I just think it's, it's about choice and it's about having a market. I think the thing to do is to watch the leaders, because they are the voice of the paper, and they don't have a byline on them. So that's where that is the voice of the paper. That is the voice of the paper.
But it's almost like the voice of the editor in a way.
It's quite important to have a lot of different views in a newspaper. I think you have to be very careful, because otherwise of not falling into that trap of just preaching to the converted and not becoming an echo chamber and not just saying the obvious thing that everyone thinks you're going to say.
And we know people listening to us now, some of them will be voting Labour because they'll have decided 14 years of Tory rule, quite enough. That's fine.
But the point is, what you're trying to do as a columnist is you're trying to sort of get people to think slightly differently than, you're trying to slightly poke them so that they you're trying to stir up a few thoughts which might make them think differently, or it might not necessarily take them to a different conclusion, but it might just kind of change their thought process, and that's good, right?
And in editorial conference each day, which puts each newspaper, every newspaper editorial conference, the leader writers, the columnists, will argue the toss between them, and a view will be formed.
Absolutely. And not everyone will agree.
No.
And there'll be a certain amount of frowning and pouting.
Yeah, and what happens in that leader conference remains in there.
It's Chatham House rules.
Chatham, and won't be tied anybody who leaks
it. Well, it has to, because otherwise you can't. I mean, this is the problem with the cabinets that leak. If you're in government...
No, Sarah, if cabinets don't leak, I'm out of a job. They have to leak,
but you have
and the
to
Labour cabinet has
discussion.
To leak too. I'm targeting my leakers. I'm targeting my leakers. Long may politicians leak, especially to Andrew Pearce. Do you need my email address? Andrew.Pearce@dailymail.co.uk.
And while we're on email addresses, if you are interested in commenting on today's podcast,
and why wouldn't you do?
You could email reaction@dailymail.co.uk, or you could leave your comment on Spotify, or you can leave a voice note, very excitingly, on WhatsApp, which is 07796 657 512. And no rude words,
and please. We don't mind if they're rude about us.
Very rude.
But no rude words. And do I even know what Spotify is, really?
It's a thing where you get music.
Okay, that's why I don't do it.
It's very good.
I don't have Spotify.
It's like, instead of having masses and masses of records or CDs or tapes, which probably is more your
I still have my CDs.
Of course you do.
I like them.
I don't. I threw all mine away.
I was only talking about my favourite music to a radio program the other day, and they said, "Who is Enya?" She was very big in the 80s, I said. I know. This person was...
Sail away, sail away.
Sail Orinoco Flows.
Indeed, yes.
Loved Enya.
Yeah.
Fabulous. She was very beautiful. I think she lived in a castle, probably courtesy of all the records of hers that I bought, I'm afraid. They asked me what was the first most significant record in my life.
What was the first record you ever bought?
Ridiculous question. What was the most significant record in my life? Waterloo. ABBA, 1974.
Was that the first record you bought?
One of them, I would think.
My first record was Xanadu by Olivia Newton-John.
And now, funny you should mention that, because I bought Sam, the record. It came out in 1977, because that was one of my favourite records. And I went into an art gallery in Hampstead about 15 years ago, because I could see there was a little show going on. There was free booze, you know me.
Obviously.
There's a drink. Tony Bennett was exhibiting art, the US crooner. And he said, "Do you know Olivia?" It was Olivia Newton-John.
Oh my goodness.
And this tiny art gallery, great piece of the Times out of it, of course. And I said, "Oh, hi," sort of simper, because she was I'm a bit of a fan of hers. And I said, I wore your record, Sam. I wore Sam out, and she said, "I hope you enjoyed it as much as you did."
Oh. Cheeky.
Risque.
Cheeky.
The humour went out of her when she realised I was a journalist.
But I remember Xanadu. I got it for my 16th birthday. It was my first record. And I had a terrible, sad 16th birthday party, because I was in Italy at the time and everyone was Catholic. And all the boys sat on one side and all the girls sat on the other, and about 3 girls just danced around in the middle to it.
Did you get a kiss?
No.
Did you get a kiss?
No, I did not.
Did anybody dance around pairs of white shoes?
Oh, it was awful. I can't remember. I still remember it. It was hell on wheels. I could not wait for it to finish.
She needs therapy. There's no business like show business. There's no... And here she is, our very own Katie Hind, queen of showbiz pages. Katie, you've had...
Katie, that's quite a good introduction.
Not a bad introduction.
Is that going to be a weekly thing?
It might be.
Oh, fabulous.
But you've had an extraordinary week because you have been charting the implosion in public of one of our best-known husband and wives, TVs, Eamonn Holmes and Ruth Langford. Extraordinary. Tell us more.
So this all started on Saturday morning. So to put it into context, for quite some months, there were many rumours going around about their marriage. The 14 years they've been married.
Been together 27 years.
A lot longer, yeah.
27 years.
Yes, yeah. And they had this quite surprise wedding, actually, I recall. But so there were many rumours going around that they'd split up. And we just it was constantly denied. So obviously we couldn't run it. They clearly didn't want it coming out. So on Saturday morning, there were sort of rumours that a statement was on its way. So yes, I sort of jumped on it and managed to get the confirmation.
And the statement came from her.
Yes.
And he refused, according to your piece, to sign up to the statement.
Yes. So when I started my inquiries on Saturday morning, he had his agent. Neither Eamonn or his agent had any idea.
Well, so when you called, he didn't know the statement was coming?
No. So I was told by his agent. He had no idea it was coming. So Ruth's team were sort of not answering their phones. So I just had to go with it and say there was a statement being prepared. And then 20, 30 minutes later, this statement dropped and it was signed off by both of them, which was news to Eamonn. So, what I found so interesting about it was that within the statement, within the sort of background to it, was that they want to continue to be friends. I thought, well, that's a bit tricky, isn't it? If you're kind of, one of you wants it out there and one of you doesn't. So I think Eamonn was very keen.
He's obviously in denial about it,
I think
he?
so, yeah.
He's obviously totally in denial about it.
Yeah, he didn't want it to end, did he?
No.
I don't think he wanted it to end, and also I think he didn't want it to end, and then didn't want it coming out, and so that we're all now talking about it.
He's been struggling with his health. He's got serious back problems. Yeah. He needs to be in a wheelchair a lot of the time. He has to be helped a lot. I had to declare an interest because he's more breakfast show presenter in GB News, and he hands over to me, and I've clearly not talked to him about it at all because it wouldn't be appropriate and say, I hope you're okay. And her career, she was on breakfast television for many years, has gone into overdrive, hasn't it? Because she's got her own shop clothes label.
Didn't he had a bit of a sort of gaff-prone couple of years, didn't he?
Yes.
Where he kept sort of saying slightly odd things on air, and he was a bit of an embarrassment, wasn't he?
Yeah. So he was on ITV. So they hosted This Morning together for about 10 years. They were the Friday cover.
Yeah.
For Phil and Holly, and they did the holiday cover too. And actually, I mean, I think the ratings backed this up, but they were extremely popular. I think they were kind of the latter Richard and Judy.
Yeah.
And he had a sort of that. He still has that
Twinkling
sort of wonderful
Irish charm.
twinkle.
Yeah, he has. Isn't he? I mean, look, he's a titan, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Huge. And you can't take that away from him.
Yeah.
Even if he did start to as you say,
he was the star, and she learnt at his feet in a way.
Yeah. I mean, he is a top broadcaster. I don't think we can deny that. But ITV started to grow a bit fed up with him. He started saying some things, and I think it culminated in it was a comment about 5G.
And it was frying everyone's brains or something like that. Yes. Sort of weird sort of conspiracy comment.
And he also made a comment about Meghan Markle describing her as uppity.
Oh,
and he got hauled in about that
What's
as
wrong
well.
with that?
Well, racist apparently.
Oh really?
So yes,
God.
he was hauled in by the bosses. So
I don't think that's fair.
I know that was a bit unfair.
You've got a much worse, Sarah Vine. I think I have.
I think we all have.
I think we all have.
But so ITV sort of slowly got fed up with him, and so then they decided that they were going to axe them from This Morning and replace them with Dermot O'Leary and Alison Hammond. But Ruth was kept on to host Loose Women.
Loose Women, yeah.
So she anchors that a few times a week, and she's very good and very well loved.
She is. She's very nice woman.
And so he then disappeared off to GB News, and her star rose.
How much do you think this is to do with the fact that he's not been terribly well for the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it feels like that, doesn't it? I mean, she's obviously very vibrant and loving life, and wants to enjoy the rest of her the rest of her life. Whereas, he had a fall, didn't he, a couple of years ago, and he's in a tremendous amount of pain.
Well, he was in hospital just a couple of weeks ago, and while he was in hospital, Ruth was putting pictures on social media, drinking a glass of Prosecco or some such thing.
Yes.
In other words, look at me, I'm happy, while her husband's in hospital.
Yeah.
Which is a bit odd.
Mean, it's just, you just don't know what goes on inside these marriages.
It's so difficult when it's conducted in public, the really implosion.
Yeah.
Must be so awful.
But what I think this particularly has been, I mean, obviously, as soon as I heard this on Saturday morning that this was coming, I thought this is going to be absolutely massive.
Yeah.
You know, because they are, you know, they're loved by the British public.
Well, as you say, they're a bit sort of Richard and Judy.
Yeah.
So
everybody knows them.
Yeah, and everyone knows them, and people get invested in other people's
Very
relationships.
much so.
It's a very strange thing that happens.
People think they know them because they've been in their home for so long.
But also they have, not only that, but I mean, you know, they've done lots together as, you know, outside ITV. They had a programme on Channel 5 going into very plush homes. You know, they've done lots of endorsement deals together.
Did they do your home, Sarah?
I don't have a plush home.
Oh, okay. Certainly not mine.
Well, not mine. But so I think people just thought that they were their friends. Didn't
Yes, I think people find it very destabilising when these high-profile couples split up, because it's sort of you sort of question everything. I mean, I suspect what's probably happened is that he's quite tricky because he's not very well, and is difficult and hard-worked and hard to live with, and she's just got fed up and is just thinking to herself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life basically looking after this angry, grumpy man?
Yeah.
Well, he's become increasingly grumpy. I mean, some of your colleagues at GB News have been telling me
he's
how
probably feeling very wounded because he
moody.
thinks, well, you know, for better, for worse, and all that kind of stuff. But maybe, I don't know, maybe they'd be better. You know, sometimes things can't be fixed, can they?
Yeah, but also when he's 64, although some people think he looks older.
Well, she's also 64.
Yeah, but she looks a lot younger, doesn't she?
Yes, yes.
She's in better shape.
The only reason he looks older is because he's just not very well.
Well, he's
in pain, isn't he?
He's immobile because of his back problem. He had a fall, he fell down the stairs as well. And he's in permanent pain, and he's still presenting 3 days a week. And it's
early. He has to be up jolly early, doesn't he?
Really early. And her career is sparkling away on the shopping channel because she's got her own clothes label, which is making a lot of money. So she's becoming a bigger star than him.
Well, of course, also they're under pressure with the tax bill, which has blighted Eamonn for a good 5. Well, he is.
That's a huge level of stress as well.
And he's really fought.
I mean, if I see a letter that says HMRC on my doormat, I hate it. Because you think instantly it's going to be complicated. I won't understand it. And he's been dealing with problems with the taxman for a couple of years. He's had to sell a home in Northern Ireland, where he's from.
Well, I mean, it's a sort of form of harassment, really, isn't it? I mean, I think he's probably just very stressed about it the whole time.
Well, he's had to, as you say, sell a house.
And the thing is, if he's not very well, you know, and he's being chased for money, then he can't really give up work.
No.
So then he's under enormous amounts of stress.
So are they divorcing or just separating?
Yes, so they're divorcing. So the statement not only confirmed the separation, but also that they are in the process of divorcing, which you know, again has its difficulties, especially perhaps when there's a tax bill on the horizon. You know, financially it might all get quite tricky.
But also when it's in the public. Sarah, forgive me for intruding on your life, but you divorced Michael.
Yes.
Michael Gove, who was a very prominent cabinet minister.
Yes.
And some of that inevitably spills into the public domain.
Yes.
And that must make it more difficult.
I think the difficulty with those sort of situations is that everybody thinks they know everything about your relationship.
Yes.
So people you've never met, you've never even seen you, will sort of write things, and you just think, I'm sorry, how can you say this?
Were you there?
You literally have no idea what you're talking about.
Did you share my husband's bed?
It's that ego depletion that happens because people are sort of appropriating your persona, and it's, you know, everyone speculates, you know, and quite often relationships stop working, and you know, I mean, lots of people experience this in their lives. It's not sort of, you know, and there's always this desperate need to try and find who's to blame, whose fault is it, blah blah blah. It's nobody's fault. It's just one of those things, you know. And in our case, it was just politics is just a very, very difficult situation.
Lots of marriages don't make it.
Exactly. It's classic, you know. It's not, I mean, the sad thing about us, it's not even very original. Do you know what I mean? It's not, I mean, you know, it was just very kind of predictable, I think, at the end. I mean, I just think we just had too many things going on, and I suspect that's what's happened with these two.
Yeah, you make me feel quite bad there, Sarah, because I've been
fault,
writing
Casey.
about. Well, no, because I've been writing about these people's marriages.
No,
I do.
Next headline.
But I do think that they have made a virtue of their. You know, you and Michael didn't go around saying, "Hey guys,
well, that was their
look at us."
But they were.
They
were a professional couple.
They were a professional couple.
Yeah, they were a professional
couple. They were.
And they financially benefited from being.
And my understanding is that they're both saying privately, we are going to remain friends. Although putting a statement out a few hours, putting a statement out, he didn't seem to know anything about the statement until a few hours before it was released. Is a bit odd.
Even so, you know, they are people and they are humans, and they sort of do.
And it's very sad.
And it's not, it's not an easy situation to be in for anyone. And I think a lot of times you see this quite a lot with these breakups of marriages. You know, when people are in their 50s and 60s, it's quite often it's the woman who instigates them because she's just like.
Yeah, they've had it.
You know, I'm not sure I really want...
I think as well there's this thing, isn't there, that men get moody as they get older and women find this kind of fun.
Fun.
Not you.
Not me.
Not you, no.
I'm not moody.
Anyway, I'm sorry they're going through it.
So and I hope... Because I like them both. Yeah. And I've known them both for many years.
I feel sorry for him because he's not in particularly good nick, and I hope he's good. They've got kids though, so I'm sure the kids will help.
Yeah.
They've got a son.
They've got a great... Yeah, they've got a son, and they're very close to him, and I'm sure he's putting his arm around both of them. And
my children were very good at mopping me up.
Good.
Actually, I have to say, kids can be very helpful in these circumstances. They can be very sweet and kind. Anyway, that's it for today.
Yes.
Stop. You have to stop making a noise now with your mouth.
There'll be more next week.
There will be more.
You're going to sing us out?
No, because the election, just think, we've got another 5 weeks of the election campampaign. I'm so excited.
Thank you to Katie for coming on.
Thank you. If you want me to cheer you up again,
with more showbiz stories, you're always very welcome. We like a little light relief. And if you want to comment, you can email reaction@dailymail.co.uk. Leave your comment on Spotify, which Andrew doesn't know what it is, but it is a thing. Or you can leave a voice note on WhatsApp 07796 657 512. Thank you all for listening.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.